Everyone who joins us for this webinar. My name is Albrecht Schnabel. I'm the head of DCAF's Asia Pacific unit. And on behalf of our entire team and the South Asia Network on promoting good security sector governance in the Asia Pacific region, I welcome you very warmly to this public seminar on cybersecurity governance in South Asia. In this seminar, we want to focus on the nexus between cybersecurity on the one hand, and then security sector governance in South Asia on the other hand. And this is an activity, as Rohit has just mentioned, of our Asia Pacific Security Sector Governance Network. As Rohit mentioned, we had started and piloted last year a number of these workshops. We bring experts together for a couple of days and then provide the gist of these discussions to a broader audience in the form of these public webinars. And the group that had been meeting for these 2 days is also then working on a joint publication with a particular kind of policy focus and a focus on recommendations. So this webinar follows the 2-day expert meeting that we mentioned, and that expert meeting focused on providing an overview on the concept of cybersecurity governance and cybersecurity reform. It also focused on identifying a range of cybersecurity threats in South Asia and discuss the application of UN norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And then it focused on discussing the importance of developing national cybersecurity strategies and national and regional challenges for implementation. And I'll conclude with a couple of comments that I draw from the concept note that informed the expert workshop. And here we realized that, and we all in this group anyway realize that cybersecurity is a very timely issue, that both state and non-state actors all across the world increasingly are forced to grapple with if they want or not. And the threats, they can come in the form of cyber criminals, for example, using ransomware against businesses, or also from state actors who try to gain access to sensitive information, or from non-state armed groups, for example, that use the cyberspace as an instrument for radicalization. And so cybersecurity is part and parcel now of our understanding of human security, national security, and international security in this 21st century. And because of this, there's a need to increase the capacity of state actors and non-state actors to defend against such cyber threats. But at the very same time, there's also a great need for good governance principles to be preserved, because an over-securitization of cyberspace is an effort to pursue absolute cybersecurity, and that can run the risk of violating key freedoms that are really at the heart of democratic societies. And this creates a number of challenges that are worth exploring and searching solutions for. And with this, I'll hand over to Rohit. And I want to thank Rohit for organizing this expert meeting, but also this webinar today. Thanks.
Thank you, Albert, for providing those opening remarks. And with this, now I would like to move to our speakers. So let me first introduce them. So we have 4 speakers with us today. So in terms of their experience, we have Mr. Major General P.K. Malik. So he's a member of the United Service Institution of India. In his distinguished career with the Indian Army, Mr. Malik had varied experience in terms of command and also the staff and instructional appointments, and one of his tasks was also the creation of the which led to the establishment of Defense Information Assurance Research Agency in its headquarters at the Integrated Defense Staff within the Indian Army, which has now been reconstituted as the Defense Cyber Agency. Mr. Malik, please, welcome to the webinar. And our second speaker is Mr. Bart Hogwen. So he's the head of the cyber capacity building at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute International Cyber Policy Center. And across his career, he has focused on international peace and security, international aid, and also the national security aspects of cyber affairs. Bart, welcome to the webinar as well. And the next speaker we have is Mr. Amar Jafri. He's the former Additional Director General of the Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan, and he's also currently leading a number of national and international initiatives encompassing thematic areas like emerging technologies, SDGs, cybersecurity, and development economics, including its flagship project that is called Digital Pakistan, which is where he's also the founder president. And lastly, we have Francisca Spitaleri. She is currently serving as a cybersecurity consultant for the World Bank's Digital Development Global Practice, and also with the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise. She's also an adjunct professor for cybersecurity policy at the South Regina University, and also a senior fellow for the cyber leadership at the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy. With this, welcome Francisca as well. And what we'll do today is we'll go gradually with each speaker. So they will have roughly 10 to 12 minutes to present some of the key ideas that were discussed during those 2 days expert workshop, but also to further shed lights on from their country and also from thematic perspective as well. So with this, now I would like to invite Mr. Malik for his remarks.
Can you hear me, Rohit?
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that nice introduction. I wish my wife was listening to it. At the outset, I would like to thank the organization DCAF, and especially Mr. Rohit, who has been after my blood for doing so many things. I have never done it in my life. So thank you, Rohit. What I'll do is I will not like to repeat what I have said earlier, except some very important issues. I would like to highlight some additional points also, which I thought is important. First is cyber threats. Now, the digital technology has got tremendous advantages. Now, we have seen this in this COVID-19 pandemic, the work from home, the education, job, health. The landscape has changed drastically. But this attack surface has also increased manifold. And the increase in cyber attacks in all the statistics that have been shown bears testimony to that. Now in India, the government of India has got a scheme called direct benefit transfer. Here what happens is the poorest of poor gets money in their bank accounts. The women get the money, they know how to spend the money, food, how much money has to be spent on food, water, education, health. So this has helped in eradicating the corruption which was omnipresent in various levels of governments, and very little used to reach to the poorest of poor people. And this digital means is one of the finest methods of eradicating or removing the corruption that is embedded in most of the societies today. So, and government are also doing a lot of things in delivery of government services. These are continuously being upgraded. The cyber means, by cyber means, passport, driving license, paying various taxes, etc., all are being done online. But that is giving a lot of problem to people because of cyber security issues that has been highlighted earlier also. Now there is a cultural issue. Our people, especially poor people in villages, they implicitly trust each other. In digital world, we say do not trust. And innocent telephone call comes and the person is having problem in getting connected, sending OTPs, capture details, etc. Mind you, they are very poor people. They're not so tech savvy. He or she requests, please share your account details or OTP. And before you say Jack Nicholson, your money gets transferred. This is a cultural and social issue. You trust your neighbors, your people, but you don't trust in cyber domain. I think some social scientists would be able to explain it better. Now, as was explained earlier, the more security you want, the degree of difficulty in operating increases. We have to remember that most of the users are not so technically savvy, barely literate. We cannot burden them with various procedures and all. So this is a challenge that we have to meet. Now, coming back to our organization, cybersecurity, we have got an organization called National critical information structure, Critical Information Structure Protection Center called NCIIPC. 7 critical infrastructures which were considered very important, that comes under them, and the rest of the critical infrastructures are with certain. Now I must emphasize here, there is a difference between critical infrastructure and critical information infrastructure. They are not same. The physical security of a critical infrastructure is very important, and both CI and CII security are interlinked. We'll not get into details. We have also seen the CII, the critical information structure. Some of the sectors are doing well, like in our country, the financial sector, the power sectors are reasonably okay. But there are other sectors which are not so. So there is a requirement of putting everybody on the same plane, and there has to be some horizontal integration, and we have to get rid of this working in silos. Difficult. Government organizations like to do that work in silos, but it has to be done in cyber world. Now, private sector emphasis too much in my previous presentations. There's a lack of trust between private sector and government agencies. There are very valid reasons. They do not want to get bad names. They first try to, if there is a breach, they first try to solve this breach. Do not report, and once they solved everything, then only may or may not report to the government agencies. By that time, if the other agencies were informed, probably some good thing would have been done, because the attack vectors are everywhere. So there is a problem there. Next point is, however, as I emphasize time and again, the talent in cyber domain lies in private sector. How to harness that talent is a big issue. The government agencies cannot have that kind of a talent in all governments all over the world. They pay peanuts, get monkeys, because the type of money the private sector offers to the professionals are good, and you know where the money is, talent lies there. So how to do it? I will give the example of GCHQ of UK, where they have they are operating side by side with the cyber professionals. They have got the BAE as their strategic partner, and that is working fine. This is one of the models that can be seen. It's not that only model, but there is there's an issue there. Now there is a dichotomy between requirement of security and by the law enforcement agencies and privacy. Both have valid reasons. The terrorist activities being planned, some major subversion activities taking place. The major source of information or intelligence comes from the communication between them. Now with the end-to-end encryption and apps who do not save any data, it is becoming very tough. If a terrorist attack takes place, the same people who are vociferous on privacy would blame security agencies for not being able to prevent the attack. Even for cyber crime and other unlawful activities, government agencies have to request the big tech companies, the Googles and Twitters and Facebooks of this world. They're trillion-dollar companies. They have got their own procedures and for giving out information. They may or may not share details, or may not. They may take time, which is not suitable for the law enforcement agency. There's a problem there. We all know when the FBI wanted to get some details from some Apple telephone, Apple refused. Ultimately, some Israeli company gave the solution, and nothing has been heard thereafter. We all know how Snowden revealed big tech companies are used by US law enforcement agencies, especially NSA and all. Of course, there's a problem. Government law enforcement agencies also are to be blamed on putting unlawful surveillance on some people. Politicians are liable to use this for their advantages. These are problems. There is no easy solution, but we have to deal with them. India is a growing economy, third largest in the world. I have shown the numbers. Shown that numbers are huge. The mobile, the emerging disruptive technology is trying to bridge the digital divide. The way our young people from remote areas, from villages, from economically disadvantaged society picks up the technology and makes use of internet is amazing. But again, they also become vulnerable to cyber predators. Now, national cyber security, there is a problem in implementing a cohesive cyber security policy. Much of the critical infrastructure that needs to come under the ambit of law belongs to private sector. Social media companies, big tech $1 trillion are not easy to come under a country's cyber laws. National cyber security strategy, will not get into details. What we have done is through a web portal, opinions were requested from everybody. Some excellent suggestions came and which are being incorporated. The delay in issuing the national cyber security strategy, it is my conjecture, I'm not part of the government, I think is because to put a party line in black and white when issues have dichotomies is difficult. They are weighing pros and cons. Our IT Act 2008 is under revision. Personal data protection bill was tabled in the parliament, but it has got into some iterations because there were a lot of observations from opposition parties, media, intellectuals and others. This is a work in progress. On April 28 this year, a certain directed the reporting cyber incidents mandatory within 6 hours. This will affect the functioning of data centers, virtual private servers, cloud service providers, VPN, etc. Some big VPN companies have said that they will not be able to operate in India, and they are getting out of this country. And we have said, thank you very much. Now, norms again. India has signed both UNGGE and UN Open-Ended Working Group. India is taking a lead role in voicing concerns of emerging economic countries and developing worlds, and to put a balance between cyber sovereignty and open internet. There are two different poles of the same pole. So we are doing this. So I will now like to give some additional points.
Mr. Malik, I would request you to wrap it up within a minute. Yeah.
Okay. Why only regional cooperation? The financial sector, say examples of Brazil, Central Bank of Kuwait, Jordan, Singapore, they are given excellent guidelines on risk management. They have got useful tools and reference guide. Why should you get into, say, Asia Pacific or say South Asian region? The different sectors can have cooperation because the cyber world is omnipresent. It is not limited to a particular region. There is no absolute security. Cat and mouse game. Use of AI, machine learning, big data analytics in cyber defense, autonomous threat detection, etc. must be taken into consideration. I wanted to highlight certain aspects in what is happening in Ukraine, but the lack of time, I will not be able to highlight those. With this, my only recommendation is be nice to your cybersecurity professionals everywhere. They deserve it. And with this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik, for highlighting some of the challenges that India is facing in terms of cyber threats, and also some of the initiatives that are taken in terms of developing policy and strategy. With this, now I would like to move to our next speaker. I would like to welcome Mr. Bhatt to highlight some of the importance of the UN global norms on cyberspace, in particularly what states should do and shouldn't do. The Bhatt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rahid. Please allow me also to first thank DCAF, Dr. Schnabel, Mr. Rahid for organizing this event and for organizing the past few days. I think it's an excellent event to talk about the basic principles of good governance in the security sector, and how that relates to the cyber domain. I want to echo Mr. Malik's point of kind of where he wrapped up, and hopefully that will be kind of the motto of the session, is kind of be nice to your cybersecurity professionals. I think that's a really nice one to keep in the back of our minds. I probably just let me just give a few reflections, and I think that also relates to the previous speaker. I think when we talk about governance and governance related to cybersecurity, globally, but also in some particular regions in the world, especially, and I think Southeast Asia is one of them, is we tend to kind of look at controlling cybersecurity or controlling the cyber domain. Whereas I think we need to kind of probably unpack that a little bit more and look for what are the proper kind of governing or governance methods of cyberspace, where it's less a matter of control and more a matter of management or multiple levels of governance that can be applied. I think there is still kind of what I have called before a reflexive attitude to turn to control, regulations, etc., without exploring other options that would meet very legitimate cybersecurity concerns. And I think the concerns, and that's also a point that Mr. Malik raised, is I think cybersecurity concerns in countries of South Asia are, for instance, very different from cybersecurity concerns in the place where I'm based here in Australia. And I think we need to recognize that as well. But in terms of kind of the cyberspace, which is, as we all know, inherently transboundary at the infrastructure level, at the level of operators, and at the level of service platforms. But it's also inherently a public-private domain where the state and governments and the public sector have certain responsibilities, but much more sits in the private domain, and not just the private sector, the commercial sector, or the big tech companies, but also I think with the very large and oftentimes underestimated kind of community of operators, which often work kind of in the non-commercial sector. And I think across the world, and definitely in the Asia Pacific, they are a very strong community of practitioners who have a key role in governing the network, not at the policy and political level, but really at kind of at the operational level. But that touches on, I think, 4 issues that Mr. Malik raised as well in his first intervention, is this issue of trust and confidence. And everything relies on us having trust and confidence in the network as it operates. But in order for that trust and confidence to maintain and to sustain, it requires obviously a level of accountability. There needs to be responsibility, and there need to be processes of reassurance between local communities and their national government, between local communities and their internet providers or big tech companies, be that international or local, between national governments and the private sector, industry, and again, the big tech sector, but also between states, between governments. And that's where I want to say a few more words about. Because I think if we look at the situation in South Asia, there are components of regional strategic rivalry between certain states. There are more powerful or more influential countries and less powerful or less influential countries that may be in a position to make misuse of weaker digitally developed nations. Or we have countries in which the state's cyber capabilities are being deployed to either infringe on certain human rights domestically or suppress certain political activities. Now, I think when we talk about governance, when we talk about cybersecurity, often very little attention goes kind of to the international dimension of that. And when we talk about international governance, we often talk about issues of international peace and security, and to an extent to international cooperation in fighting cybercrime. And I think there still is kind of a lasting impression that cyberspace is generally ungoverned, especially when it comes to state-to-state competition, rivalry or conflict. States are using proxies, patriotic hackers, or semi-criminal groups, or loosely affiliated networks in the community, talking about advanced persistent threats. And even President Obama in 2014 called cyberspace the wild, wild west. And I don't think that holds true. Not then, not in 2014, and not today, not now. And in that regard, I would like to draw your attention to the work of a couple of the UN working groups that Mr. Malik also referred to. Already back in 2015, they agreed to what they call the Emerging UN Framework for Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace. And in early 2021, this was reaffirmed by the General Assembly. I think someone is not on mute. Yeah, thanks. And this framework that the UN, all the UN member states, all 193 member states agree to, includes a recognition that international law applies to state conduct in cyberspace. It includes agreement to a set of 11 norms of behavior, a series of confidence building measures, and a joint and shared commitment to capacity building. As the analogy goes, cyberspace is as strong as its weakest link. So there is a shared commitment to building each and every country's capacity to the extent possible as well. And I think especially those norms that the UN member states agreed deserve some particular attention. I think they are probably one of the more practical and actionable elements of the framework that are also directly tied to what countries can do and are doing already domestically. They cover issues around cybersecurity policy. For instance, are you as a country able to establish a whole of government view on what's happening in cyberspace? And are you able to develop and to take decisions from a whole of government perspective on cybersecurity related issues? And are you able to manage and oversee what is happening on your territory? Do you know what's going on? And are you able to guarantee human rights and privacy for your people? So cybersecurity policy being one area of the norms, the second area being ICT security, more looking kind of at the technical elements of being able to protect critical infrastructure, establish a culture of cybersecurity within the economy, across the economy, ensure the security of your supply chains, making sure where things are coming from and that there are no built-in vulnerabilities that you are unaware of. And do you have systems in place where people can disclose found vulnerabilities? And thirdly, is the area what I would call around diplomatic relations. So are you as a country, as a nation, as a government, able and willing to engage in international forums? Are you participating? Are you willing to assign and establish points of contact? So if there is an emergency, does someone else know who to call or who not to call? And are you actively pursuing the exchange of information and assistance? One of the greatest challenges, so this is kind of a summary of the agreement being made in 2015 and reaffirmed in 2021, as I said. One of the greatest challenges now is kind of to action these and to demonstrate locally in each and every country in the world what is happening and what's already being done and what more can be done. And that's obviously dependent and commensurate with each country's level of cyber development or cyber maturity. And why I think this is important, also because in more and more states, we observe that security agencies are equipped with certain cyber capabilities, be that within the armed forces, in the army, for instance, within the police, within the intelligence services, etc., etc. Now, that in itself, from an international perspective, is not a problem so much. But it's more important to make sure and that we are all assured that the operations of state security agencies in cyberspace are guided by certain rules and principles and that they observe certain professional standards. With, of course, the aim that as we are all developing our capabilities, that is not adding extra tension to situations that may already be tensious to existing political, military, or economic relations between countries in competition. And I think the UN norms, as I described them, provide these at a very fundamental and basic level. It determines certain targets that are out of scope, such as critical infrastructure of other states or the national computer emergency response teams of other states, and kind of gives guidance to states on what to do and what not to do. Two big points to wrap up. While the UN norms aren't kind of the silver bullet to international peace and security, they provide kind of, I think, the fundamental basic minimum. And they give guidance, they give support for states who are in the process of either developing their national cybersecurity strategy or are developing national cyber capabilities. And the norms, I think, suggest very clearly that at the minimum, each country should have a kind of incident response capabilities. And in most cases, this is a national computer emergency response team, but it could also be outsourced to others. But at least, is there a capability within the country to respond to incidents? That's a technical, non-political, non-policy entity. a country should have some kind of policy capability to be pulled together data from technical forensics and other areas such as the telecoms community, the defense sector, as well as the police and law enforcement community. They should also have a capability to maintain human rights and fundamental freedoms. So are we able to make sure that the human rights and freedoms of our people are guaranteed in the cyber domain? And this could be done, for instance, by collaborating and seeking collaboration with national human rights bodies looking after the online domain. But also a capability, as Mr. Malik referred to as well, to seek effective collaboration, not control, but collaboration with the private sector and industry to promote and maintain ICT security practices across industry and across the economy. Now, finally, in closing, in strengthening cybersecurity governance within individual South Asian countries, and I think across the region and from region to region and globally, it is first of all important that our countries start recognizing their responsibilities when it comes to actions in cyberspace. A first responsibility is to establish first and foremost a good understanding of what is the cybersecurity environment in my country and what is a cyber threat environment. And that differs from country to country, and with that difference come different policy directions. A second responsibility is to determine clear roles and responsibilities of the various state security agencies when it comes to their actions in the cyber domain. We need to know what are their responsibilities and under which kind of command and control do they operate, and what's the oversight and control over those agencies. And finally, a responsibility to engage in international dialogues so that risks of misunderstanding and misperceptions are mitigated to the extent possible. Thanks, Rahid. That was my...
Yeah, thank you, Bart, for touching on so many important things and also highlighting the importance of the UN global norms, but also the role the management and oversight actors should play importantly in the cybersecurity governance. With this, now I would like to move to our next speaker. So I would like to invite Mr. Jaffrey to share his presentation or the key points on this webinar. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First, I would like to thank Bert for giving us a very, very valuable information in last 2 days. That was very, very much rewarding. And I think for the first time, we have found a framework in which all states can work together. With reference to Pakistan, I think we had our first law in 2002, 20 years before, that started with ETO, Electronic Transaction Ordinance. That has the provision for spamming and all these things, emails and all these things. Then we had a history of bringing laws into Pakistan, and I have the proud honor of heading that organization, which is called NR3C, National Response Center for Cybercrime, as a pioneering head. Then finally, last year, we have a cybersecurity policy issued by the government of Pakistan, and again, I had the proud honor of being its member. Now, our cybersecurity policy is very much in line with the global best practices, and all relevant organizations are working in an environment where we can all work together with the global initiatives. So with this initiative, where we have the human resource development, like guidelines issued by the worthy speaker yesterday, I think that will be a very rewarding experience for us to work with the global communities. Then with the framework, we will have a complete roadmap for next 5 to 10 years to work together. I understand that from cyber crimes, which were the traditional crimes, we moved to cyber terrorism, then we finally moved to cyber warfare. But now with fake and deep fake opportunities to the criminals, I think we need to be very seriously ponder on that how we can control these things. I believe that the session put forward in terms of CERTs, Computer Emergency Response Team, public sector and private sector both. So I think that will be a baseline from all of us can take a start, and we can, as a takeaway from this conference, we can use the platform of the issued by the UN yesterday, and we can start working on our search together. Sharing of information would be a big challenge like always, but I think that can be, this gap can be filled with a mutual trust and understanding, because as I expressed yesterday, that criminals and terrorists are friends of no country. And then we will have to take into account that now threat is not only to the critical infrastructures. Threat is now to the basic needs of human beings, because food is a basic need now. Electricity is a basic need now of all human beings. And I think if we see the global crisis going very fast these days, I think we need to bring something like digital diplomacy. I shared yesterday, because with SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which again are UN agenda, now we are trying to make things secure. So digital diplomacy can make some tracks like SDG tracks, cybersecurity track, emerging technologies tracks, because in very few years to come, Industrial Revolution 4.0 is already there. Our industries will be hijacked, let me be very frank. The ransomware will now transfer to industries. So it's very scary for all of us. So we need to work together within a framework. Human resource development is going to be a big challenge, but human resource development can work at a global level, and we can learn from each other, we can help each other to bring this cyber secure world. And very finally, I would like to say something about the Project University Plus. I think the university students from different countries should have exchange program. The university students from other countries can come to Pakistan. Pakistan university students can go to other countries, and within this framework, because I think the university student is in the best form of his or her career. And finally, as I said yesterday, we should link sustainable development goals with cybersecurity of the world. Because to my understanding, if we do not use the emerging technologies in SDGs, we cannot, let me repeat again, we cannot achieve the targets of SDGs. If we don't use IoTs, if we don't use artificial intelligence, I think it will be dream only to achieve the targets of SDG by 2030. I think I must congratulate DCAF for taking this initiative and bringing in place a framework in which at least we have a starting point, we have a baseline, and we can build upon. Thank you, Ray. Thank you all members in the group. And I can see the participants, a lot of people from Pakistan, they have already joined. I'm seeing them. And this is very exciting for me that my cybersecurity community in Pakistan are very much now in line with the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffrey. Importantly, highlighting the linkages between the SDG and the cybersecurity. I think that is something we'll also take. We would also have taken note of it, and we'll continue to work on this front. Now that with this, now I would like to invite our last speaker, last but not the least, Francisca. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rohit. First of all, good morning, good afternoon to colleagues and friends around the world. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this final day of our 2 days workshop meeting. So let me thank again DCAF and Rohit for hosting this excellent event on cybersecurity governance. I've learned a great deal. I hope I shared some of my knowledge and expertise. I'm going to use a few of the slides that I've used during our expert 2-day meetings, just for everybody to see what we've been working on, some of the findings and recommendations that I tried to summarize in my key points. So, and I'll promise to stay brief and allow for time for questions. So let me know when you see my screen. Just this will allow us to stay in time, hopefully, and on point. So just to summarize a few of the points that I've heard from all of you in the past couple of days, but also to bring the point that cybersecurity is not a standalone issue that should be treated in silos. As we have heard for the past couple of days from experts from all over Southeast Asia, just like in the rest of the world, we have seen countries accelerating their digital transformation and embedding digital technologies in all of their essential services and critical infrastructure, rightly so, to support their economic growth, their productivity, modernization, efficiency, enable skills development, encourage human and social development. And like Mr. Jaffrey just said, also as a way to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which, by the way, all 17 of them include digital components and therefore could all be harmed by growing cyber threats. it was really interesting to hear a lot of not just the cybersecurity practices and measures, but also the digitization strategies that are coming from the region. We know that more than half of the global population is now connected. However, if we looked at Southeast Asia, it's really interesting to see the digital divide that still persists between the connected and unconnected. We go from some of the most connected countries like Australia, to some of the ones that still have to connect a majority of their population. But nonetheless, again, we know that global economic growth is directly dependent on the adoption of these digital technologies, on the level of digitization and connectivity. And the reason why I continue to repeat this is because this trend is not going to slow down. And if we want to achieve those SDG, and if we want to consider digitization and connectivity as an enabler of that inclusive and sustainable economic growth, then we need to protect those technologies, those infrastructure, and those systems that we depend on. And that can only happen if the underlying infrastructure and the systems and the device that underpins connectivity and digitization are safe, secure, trustworthy, reliable, resilient. But the problem that we have seen and we have heard from various speakers is that on one hand, we have this rapid digitization trend, and on the other hand, we've had a parallel proliferation of all sorts of cyber threats. We have heard examples of ransomware attacks, data thefts, bank haste in Bangladesh, phishing scam, other unlawful activities. And these disruptive cyber activities are causing real harm beyond ID thefts. They're already degrading our economies. They're threatening national security. And we have seen a whole host of criminals and nation-state adversary taking advantage of these internet infrastructure dependencies and our hyperconnectivity to breach system and move laterally across national system. And so we need to raise the issue to our national leaders and enlarge a conversation beyond our cybersecurity community to make clear that, yes, we've been seduced by the benefits of digital technologies to increase productivity, efficiency, lower cost of storage, but we can no longer defer or delay investments in cybersecurity and cyber resilience of our networked infrastructure and digital operation. We can no longer ignore cybersecurity. And so paying attention to cybersecurity requires addressing both current and future digital risks. And so we need to inform our leaders. We need to make them more knowledgeable about the specific cyber context in their countries, within their industry. And we need to provide them with objective and repeatable metrics so that they can clearly assess their current country's maturity and their commitment to securing their national cyber infrastructure. I'm sure all our national leaders would say that they are committed, but what are the metrics that they're using to see progress, to identify gaps, to understand what else might be needed and how to prioritize certain measures. So other interesting facts that I've learned, I've researched more in the past few days, is actually that Southeast Asian countries have certainly begun to prioritize cybersecurity. I commend all our speakers for presenting from all their countries example of establishing national competent authorities for cybersecurity, approving, or those who are in the process of developing national cybersecurity strategy. They're setting up a computer emergency response teams, CERT and CSERT. They're updating legal and regulatory framework. However, again, you can see significant differences between their level of maturity. And I've heard a lot of common issues that I hear when I engage with leaders from around the world. There is sometimes a lack of political will. There is still this perception of cybersecurity as a military, intelligence, law enforcement issue. So we need to change the narrative when we talk about cybersecurity and frame it more within risk management, sustainability, inclusivity, trustworthiness, a digital economy. This will speak to many more people and many more leaders and organizations in the development community, not just the cybersecurity community. Other common issues, problems that have been raised is lack of funding for implementation, the lack of leading agencies and accountability. We have heard that some weak processes, and we need reassurances that, like Bart just said, between local communities, internet service providers, national governments, government, private sector entities that run and operate our critical infrastructure, and between governments. And I would add to this long list of problems, again, this is what I hear as I travel around the world, is that few countries are still calculating, on one hand, the opportunities of digital transformation and connectivity, and on the other hand, the impact, the cost of cyber insecurity and having less resilient critical services, disruption of services, cybercrime, fraud, ransomware. When you see the dollar amount, the euro, the whatever currency you're working on, you start really seeing that the benefits that we expect from digitization and connectivity are being seriously harmed by these host of cyber activities, cyber crime activities and others. Another reason or main reason why I think I was invited to this workshop, and I won't go into the details today, but this is a global public goods and anybody can go online and download it, is a sort of guide, a blueprint, a roadmap that leaders can use, a national leaders, policymaker, to think more strategically about cybersecurity, cyber preparedness, cyber resilience at the national level. For those of you who might not be yet familiar with the guide to developing a national cybersecurity strategy, this is meant to be a useful, flexible, user-friendly tool framework to support, again, countries that are in the process of developing, updating, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating their national cybersecurity strategy, policy. We have heard from all our speakers that national cybersecurity strategy can take many forms. There is not just one universally agreed form of strategy, but nonetheless, it's a document that sets the vision, the objective, the scopes of the country in cybersecurity. The first such guide was published by a consortium of organizations back in 2018. And in the last 3-4 years, we have seen the first edition of the guide being used as an important resource for governments, especially in developing countries, to develop and implement their national cybersecurity strategies. And I think governments are certainly getting the message. In fact, we have seen a 40% increase in the number of countries that have now adopted or in the process of adopting national cybersecurity strategies. However, despite the commendable progress, 60% of least developed countries still don't have a strategy. I showed you some in that second slide. And most developing countries are still struggling to implement it during the lack of financial, human, material resources. So the second version of the guide was published just this past November, as the same structure as the first one, but we wanted to reflect an evolving nature of cyberspace, the increased dependency on ICT, especially after the COVID pandemic, and all the emerging new security trends and risks that can really impact the safety, the prosperity, the resilience of a country, and that we believe should be included in national strategic planning. Again, I won't go into the details, but just want to emphasize that this guide was developed by a consortium of over 20 organizations and observers that have diverse and demonstrated experience in cybersecurity field. So it's not a guide of the UN, it's not a guide of one specific private sector organization or think tank or multilateral development banks, but it was really a multi-stakeholder effort. And as such, we expert and representative of all these many organizations believe that this is probably the most comprehensive, yet again, easily usable, employable framework, blueprint to help countries develop and implement comprehensive, inclusive, sustainable national cybersecurity strategies. And the point throughout the guide is to take a country-specific economic, social, political vision, its context, its cultural and societal values into account so that they can tailor their specific strategies and policies based on their country context. Again, I don't want to go into the details today, but just want to show you the guide is made of 3 main components. The first one is the process, the life cycle on how you develop a national cybersecurity strategy. from having a clear vision and high-level objective and priorities, to identifying the right stakeholders, like Bart was saying, to establishing a competent authority, person or agency that is responsible and accountable for the management and implementation of the national cybersecurity strategies, to clearly outline the steps, the programs, the initiatives that specific countries commits to undertake in order to protect their national cyber infrastructure and in order to increase the security and resilience of their country. We encourage countries to be very clear about the resources that they're going to allocate to those activities. Otherwise, a strategy remains a pretty paper in a drawer approved by government, but that is not really usable. And so for that reason, it's really important to also have an action plan with clear metrics and timelines, key performance indicators, so you can measure that effectiveness. And if not, you can go back, revise, adapt, adjust. Another things I want to point out are some of the overarching principles. These are not just about a strategy. Whether a government is establishing policy and other activities, these are cross-cutting, overreaching principles that are applicable to all areas and themes of a policy or strategy that should be considered across all those steps in the development process, from drafting a new document to implementing it. Again, we believe these are important principles to follow across the board. And last but not least, we walk through the content of a strategy. This doesn't mean that every single strategy needs to have all these chapter focus areas, as we call them, or all those good practice elements. However, this again, it's meant to be a comprehensive guide so that a country can pick and choose what they need to either update their strategy or revise it, or if they're developing a brand new one. And the goal again is to walk them through all the different good practice elements that we've seen from around the world to develop as much of a comprehensive, effective, inclusive strategy. This is in no way meant to be prescriptive. Again, it intends to support and stimulate national efforts to develop successful, comprehensive national strategies. And just to wrap up, again, we have heard a lot of really good examples from the Southeast Asian nation that I encourage to continue, follow. I will certainly pay a lot more attention. And when we talk about national cybersecurity strategy, again, we're not just talking about a document, it can be a policy, a framework, a set of laws, but that really needs to include all the key stakeholders. This is not just the government. And again, I commend all the comments made before me because they brought a lot of these points as well. Again, here's the link. Rohit, I believe you're going to share material with the audience and anybody who's interested. So with that, I'll stop here and open it to question. I'm sorry, we only have a few minutes left.
No, thank you, Francisca, for highlighting the importance of national cybersecurity strategy. So we have received some questions in the chat box. So I will try to group them together and probably direct to our four speakers as well. So the first question is more related to the linkage between the cybersecurity and disinformation. So the question is, how can be the misleading propaganda through social media be harnessed? So that is the question that the audience has asked. And second question is more linked to that we have been discussing so far, the importance of laws and regulation in the cyberspace. So the question is, it is very difficult to get the data from other countries. So what is the solution, and are there any efforts being made in order to share those data, or the challenges that are encountered to share those data? Third question is linked to the ethics. Is how can we ensure ethics is involved in the cybersecurity industries? And at the same time, how can a platform could be established in order to harness the trust between the cybersecurity professionals? So this could be a third question. So let's try to address these three questions, and then we'll move to the second round of questions as well, if that is okay with all the four speakers. So perhaps
can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Okay, fine, thank you. For the ethics one, I think UN is also working under a charter, and every country is bound to obey that charter. I think this framework, this guideline must be brought in the charter of UN, and UN may issue this basic line of ethics. And if you will do this, definitely this penalty will be there. Because we are moving in an era in which everybody is free to say anything on social media. This first question, the fake, the disinformation is also linked with it. So it's very easy to make any news about anyone. And by the time he or she explains it, the damage is already done. So I think it's very important that we should have some standards, some norms, like like for example, in our real life, if we misbehave something, if we do something which is not against the standard norm, standard practice, for example, we don't shout publicly. If there's a difference, we want to raise our voice and we say that let's agree to disagree. So I think in the cyber world also, we should have a baseline of norms, and media should project it, and UN should monitor that which country is adhering to those norms and standards and which country is not. I'll go to the extent of sanctions. For example, if in one particular country, the laws are not there to stop these nonsense things, so we can have some sanction against those countries. So this is my quick response to the two questions. Thank you.
Would other speakers would like to add something on that? Mr. Malik, yeah.
See, this is a very interesting question, but it is very critical also. You see, especially in response to the social media companies, as I brought up earlier, they're all trillion-dollar companies. They have got their own system of processes and procedures to weed out something and not to weed out something. But we have seen in recent times what happened while there was a agitation going right up to the Washington DC's capital and all, and how the previous presidents' interventions or tweets and others were deleted. There is a slant of every company there. Second is, they are supposed to be neutral. This, especially the social media companies, that facade has been torn away to shreds in the recent Ukraine conflict. When the Gaza conflict last year only was taking place, they had made organizations, Facebook, Twitters, and the TikToks of this world, to see what is coming and what is not coming, and to check the authenticity. What is that in Ukraine? So it is a difficult process, but we have to catch the bull by the horn. This is creating hell of a lot of chaos, especially in South Asian countries, where it's a volatile country, where things can be made up by showing some mod videos, more to this thing with these AI-enabled things, false news and all, which can cause terrible damage to the country and the social structure. So we have to catch the bull by the horn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Considering the time limitation, if that is okay with the speaker, I would like to move to the second round of questions. That is okay. So the second round, it focused more on the issue of accountability. So basically the audience, they want to know how the accountability framework could be enhanced in the context of cybersecurity governance. That is one set of questions. So perhaps I may request Bart to take that question or to respond to that, if that is okay with you. And second is more on the cybersecurity strategies. So I think how quickly such guides are required to be reviewed and revised, considering the high speed of technological advancement and also the cyber attack sophistications. So perhaps I will request Francisca to respond to that questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. You make it very easy. So the issue of accountability, and I think, by the way the question was framed, it's obviously a very broad question. So let me try to take it into at least a direction. I think when we talk about accountability, I think the first prerequisite in order for someone or an organization or a state to be accountable, it first needs to be responsible. So I think the first step really is, are responsibilities assigned in a clear, unambiguous way? Now let's look at the kind of at the national level. True accountability obviously comes when there are clear responsibilities for what government is doing, what government is responsible for, and within government, what are the different departments or executive agencies responsible for. And then it would be very handy and recommendable to also determine what's the responsibility of the other stakeholders, whether that's industry, whether those are kind of the social media platforms, as we just talked about, the internet service providers or the network operators, etc., etc. Now, I think in order to kind of create a kind of a, what do you call it, a culture of accountability, I would caution against what I said at the start of my talk about kind of the idea of control or regulation. I think it's a kind of natural thing to first consider, but I think it's really counterproductive in this space, because everything is kind of transparent, and lots of the kind of the companies or the platforms are not registered in our countries. They are kind of literally multinational. So if we can't access it through our domain, you just go somewhere else. So accountability comes, I think, with calling on each and every stakeholder's responsibility to make sure that the cyber domain is a safe and secure place to connect and to interact. And I think that comes down to all of us, be that from civil society, be that from industry, be that from academia or from government, to take that responsibility and to call on others to take that responsibility, and to be kind of be critical and self-critical about what we do and how we behaved. So I think those are some of the elements that I would suggest would come with a accountability framework, which also very much relates to discussions about disinformation and how do you manage that. It also relates to, I think, the question about ethics and how do you manage kind of the ethics of cybersecurity researchers. It's all about kind of taking responsibility and adhering to certain standards without infringing on each and every one of let's say, each other's mandate and ownership of certain parts of the domain.
Thanks, Bart. Now I would request Francisca to respond on the question on the cybersecurity strategy.
Yep. So first of all, thank you for the excellent question. And having done a pilot project with the ITU to look at strategies around the world, I can tell you statistically, countries are updating or reviewing their strategy every 2 to 5 years. Those are already in their second, third, or even fourth iteration of a national cybersecurity strategies. However, I'll caution, the reason for updating a strategy is not because there is a new ransomware strain, or because now we're seeing maybe a switch from ransomware pandemic to business email compromise. This is not the reason why a country develops a national cybersecurity strategy. Yes, we recognize the evolving nature of cyber threats, and that's why we came up with a new guide, among the many other reasons. But it was mostly driven by actually how dependent and reliant countries have become on digital technologies. Again, remember that a national cybersecurity strategy or framework or policy is really the expression of the vision, the high-level objectives, the priority that should guide the country in addressing cybersecurity and cyber resilience. It's not about specific cyber threats. It's the place where they should identify, first of all, the country's most critical digital dependency. So what are those services, infrastructure, digital assets that if they were harmed, it could have really grave economic and national security consequences on a country. It's a place to identify the key stakeholders that are responsible for improving and the overall cybersecurity of the nation and implementing the strategy. If there has been established a competent authority, again, This is the document where you describe what that competent authority is. How is it going to be accountable for the management implementation of that strategy? So when you see new strategy being updated, usually is to update those elements, not the specific cyber threats. Now, for a practical example, let's say the strategy discussed cyber hygiene and the importance of raising cybersecurity awareness among population. In the strategy, you might say, we will have an annual campaign on cyber awareness. Many countries now in October host National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Now, the strategy will only refer to that in general. It is the action plan and then the specific steps and programs that agency organizes and might change and be updated every year based on the new threats that happens. But this is not the reason for updating the whole strategy. So the strategy should recognize and acknowledge this fast changing threat landscape, but establishing clear roles, responsibility, a vision for the country, and a budget that is more important than the specific cyber threats. Ultimately, you're still dealing with software and hardware. And as we all know in this community, the main issues is still that we have unpatched system, legacy system, people not paying attention. I mean, the basic issues that we are still dealing with are the same issues we were discussing 10 years ago. It's just that criminals have become more sophisticated and inventive, and they find new ways to breach system and to move laterally across systems. So again, very much welcome the question and invite all of you to really think about what a overarching policy and strategy is meant to address. As we, those in the trenches, not me, try to address the specific cyber threat of the flare of the day.
Thank you, Francisca, on that response. And during the registration also, we received some questions, but I think I would like to first give the floor to the people in the screen. If they have any further questions to our speakers, please raise your hand and then you can take the floor yourself as well. I think Humayun Jafar, I think he was with us. He raised his hand, but he left now. I think I saw his message. But are there any questions to our speakers from the screen? If there are none, I think we have received some questions during the registration as well. So perhaps this question is directed. I will float the question first. So one of the audience, it asks, like, in what areas, if any, confidence building measures could be initiated amongst the South Asian countries on the issue of cybersecurity? So perhaps this question could be responded first by Mr. Malik and Mr. Jaffrey, and then then I'll request again to Bart and Francisca to share some inputs on that. Mr. Jaffrey, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think the very right question, the confidence building measures should be taken with the relevant states. As I shared yesterday, the political conflicts between the countries should be different, and the cyber security matters should be handled differently. This is the first step. I think these should not be linked together. We can go on with political differences, that is there, that is something politics. But when we talk about cybersecurity, I think cyber is something like a common pool of water for everyone. If one user of the pond pollutes it, it's polluted for the entire user. So I think this is the baseline that we should separate these two things. And next, I will recommend visits to the countries. I think I have been to India 2 times. Whenever I was invited, I think Nepal, Bangladesh, I think all these countries, they can have, DCAF organize some conferences. So the physical meeting between the stakeholders, I think that will build more confidence. So I think we need to bring some maturity in the minds of the people that cyberspace is equally benefiting and equally harm for everybody. So I think from this baseline, we can take a start. And as we discuss further the norm and ethics, anybody doing anything which is not in line with the framework, the guidelines we are discussing, I think there should be some metrics that this country is not conforming to these standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffrey. Mr. Malik, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the confidence building measures can include the development of skills, the human resources, policies and institutions that increase the resilience and important functions for promoting adherence to international laws and norms, responsible state behavior, etc. Specifically, what can be done is we have discussed about the national cybersecurity strategies and all. So this is providing access to relevant technologies, support to computer emergency response teams or computer security incident response team, as you say, establishment of specialized training and tailored curricula, including training the trainer program, which is very important, the programs and professional certifications. The benefits of establishing platforms for information exchange, including legal and administrative good practices, has been recognized, and my previous speaker has been harping on for a number of times, which is very important. This information exchange, including legal and administrative good practices, and contributions from other relevant stakeholders. With this, I think I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Would Bart or Francisca like to say something on some of the initiatives on the confidence building measures based on your experience or your work from the other sub-regions as well, which might be applicable in the case of South Asia?
Yeah, I think, I mean, with regard to the confidence building measures, and if I refer to one of the reports that were concluded by the UN last year, they explicitly list a couple of confidence building measures. Let me just kind of well, call out 4 of them. One is that there should be, or that countries are encouraged to undertake cross-regional exchanges of lessons and good practices. So share what works in your country. And I think the platform that we have here, organized through DCAF, is one example of such an activity that is kind of supporting confidence building within the region. Third thing is nominating what they've called national points of contact, both at the technical, at the policy, and at the diplomatic level. And I'm not sure, and I doubt it exists, let's say, in South Asia at the moment. But there are examples in other regional forums, in particular the OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, as well as ASEAN and the ASEAN Regional Forum, which I think early last year or the year before agreed on a directory of cyber points of contact, which is simply a list of names of who to call, either at the national CERT, at the in the Department of Foreign Affairs, or in another agency of government. Thirdly, which is more of the reporting type, is that countries are encouraged to update their country profile on the cyber policy portal of UNIDIR, which is the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. So if you go to cyberportal.org, I believe, you'll find country profiles for almost all countries in the world, which details their policy, legislation, etc., etc. And finally, there is an annual reporting process through the UN Secretary General, through which all countries are encouraged to let the UN Secretary General know of their observations and their issues. I think all these kind of things relate to kind of sharing information and sharing concerns and being open to being contacted to others as well. And forums like these in the Track 2 and Track 2 community are generally very worthwhile undertakings when it comes to building further confidence.
Thanks, Bart. Yeah, Francisca?
I would only, I completely 100% support what Bart said. I couldn't have said it better. I would just add that there needs to be a recognition that there are more vulnerable communities than others. Actually, I don't think cyber threats affect everybody equally. I'm sorry to disagree with Mr. Traffic, because I understand the point he was trying to make. But I think especially in areas of the world where there are a lot of minorities, whether they're ethnic or religious, women, there are more vulnerable populations. And there needs to be a recognition that some of those swath of society are more affected than others by cyber threats, whether it's online harassment, disinformation, or fraud and cybercrime. And that recognition by countries means that they're also going to put in place processes, measures, programs, campaign to address the concerns and the risks to more vulnerable or underserved communities. And that can also be part of a national cybersecurity strategy, by the way.
Thanks, Francisca. There's one question that came up in the chat box, but I think it's more directed to us. I mean, to DCAF. It says how DCAF can facilitate or assist in the establishment of national SOTs in the South Asian countries. Just to let you know, I mean, even in when DCAF was working in the Eastern European countries, it worked closely with the ITU. So it's the United Nations International Telecommunication Union, which works directly in building the capacity of the SOTs. And even in our program or in the projects, DCAF worked with the ITU in building the capacity of SOTs. So DCAF might not work directly with the national level SOTs, but it might work through the ITU. Especially, we had people from the ITU Asia Pacific unit yesterday in our program, in the closed door program. So where he also shared some of the initiative that was taken by ITU in terms of building the capacity of SOTs in the Asia Pacific region, but also some of the development and initiative that have been undertaken in the South Asian level. So we might share some of those reports as we close. I mean, after this webinar as well. Perhaps we can take one.
Roy, if I may, just to share a quick experience working with multilateral development banks who are funding some of the efforts to establish certain CSIRTs. Keep in mind, this is not a silver bullet to solving or addressing cybersecurity threats. It's just that a lot of countries think that by investing in establishing a CERT or CSIRT, it's something tangible. Now they have something to show for. But keep in mind that when resources are lacking, that is not necessarily the first and most important thing to do. Yes, you need incident response capability, but those can be developed in many ways. So think about the overarching architecture of cybersecurity within a country. Having a certain CSIRT, when resources are lacking, is not necessarily the first things or only things. And I see too many countries, developing countries, they ask for loans from multilateral development banks and others to develop certain CSIRT, then become this like building establishments, hiring people, buying hardware and software, and then they can repay their loans. So having a clear stock taking of what are the risks and concerns and needs and how best to address them, and developing tailored approach is really important. Doing that research, just saying, oh, we now have a CERT, now we have a CSIRT, and now we're incredibly in debt and cannot then not only repay the loan, but think about the continuity. Because when you build an institution, then you need to budget for the continuity and sustainability of that institution, for updating software that becomes non-usable after 5 years if you can't update it and if you can't support the workforce needed for it. So think about the cost before you just say we need to establish a CERT, and how you're going to sustain those costs over time when that loans or grants run out. So that's just a cautionary tale, because I've seen it happen too often.
Thank you, Francisca, for the clarifying on it. Perhaps we can take one last question, and I think it might be directed towards Bart. So it's more on the UN global norms. So the question is, to what extent have the 11 UN norms have been explicitly referred to by states, civil society organization, and academia when holding states to account for their behavior in cyberspace? So this is the same discussion we were having for past 2 days. In a way, there are norms, but it's very difficult to implement. And how do you make the states accountable towards their behavior in cyberspace? So I guess I will request Bart to respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit. That's a really good and interesting question. I think the honest answer is that's still kind of emerging and growing. But what we have seen over the particularly last 2 to 3 years, is that so let's say just one step back. I think there is a level of distrust, in particular between I mean, the known countries. So for instance, European countries, Australia, Russia, and China. Now, as I mentioned that in early 2021, these agreements were reaffirmed. Actually, we saw in the last year and a half that there have been a couple of attributions, which are public statements by governments, where they hold another government responsible for a certain cyber incident or cyber attack of great magnitude. And in those statements, they refer explicitly to the norms of responsible state behavior. For instance, a country was not able to ensure that its that the ICTs on its territory were not being misused by themselves or by a third actor, or they were not able to make sure that their agencies did not target our critical infrastructure. And by the same extent, one of the norms talks about how do you assign responsibility to another state, which means that you actually disclose that it's really hard to make an official claim, and that you have to take all broader considerations into account. So I think there is now a growing body of knowledge and kind of public understanding of and recognition that these norms matter, and that also countries need to kind of explicitly refer to them more and more in what they do. So that is definitely growing. That is still very much kind of a state-to-state affair, because so much of the information is, of course, in the hands of state agencies and not kind of available in the public domain. But we do see, for instance, on one of the norms which talks about the independence and kind of untouchability of national certs, just to go back to certs, is that kind of the internet technical community is very adamant that, for instance, the position of national certs is not being politicized or militarized. So they take kind of heed of some of those norms and want to make sure that the independence and kind of technical nature of incident response teams is maintained and secured. And that is an issue in some countries where the national cert is part of kind of a wider defense or security establishment.
Thank you, Bart, for your response. And I think these are the discussion we had for the past 2 days as well. And I think with this, I think we'd like to formally close this webinar as well. But just to I mean, let everyone know, thank you for participating in the webinar. Many thanks to all 4 speakers who not only today but also throughout those 2 days were engaging with us in terms of delivering and debating on range of issues. So we had a very productive discussion in terms of looking into some of the emerging cybersecurity threats in the region, especially from the country perspective also. And we saw some of the increasing cybersecurity attacks in the countries like the Bangladesh, the biggest Bangladesh bank heist case, which was presented and discussed during those 2 days. We also look into some of the challenges the Indian nuclear plants are facing from the cyber attacks as well, and some of the attack to their electricity grid as well, and also the challenges the non-state actors present in the cyber domain. So we quite dwelt on those challenges as well. Also, we emphasize a lot on the importance of accountability, and also the issue of strengthening the role of oversight actors. And there we also from DCAF also our ongoing work on also strengthening the ability of parliamentarian to engage on this issue. I mean, in terms of strengthening their oversight over the cybersecurity issues and the actors they are, I mean, who are kind of active in the cyber domain. So there are some of the rules and the regulation that needs to be worked on, and we talked about those issues as well throughout those 2 days, with the idea of enhancing and improving the cybersecurity governance. That is the ultimate work that DCAF has also been doing for the past 5 and 6 years. And also we looked into the issue of the importance of the UN global norms, which Bart kind of highlighted now as well. These are the norms, these are the standards. But again, these are the challenges the states would face until and unless they put it into a practice. And we also discussed yesterday and throughout those 2 days, what are the challenges that the states or this will face in terms of internalizing these norms, but also kind of making or changing their behavior based on those norms. But again, these are the ongoing efforts from the United Nations, but also the global kind of cybersecurity community to kind of further promote this norm and kind of push towards internalization of these norms, reflecting in their policy, but also in their strategies as well. And lastly, we talked about the importance of national cybersecurity strategy, why we need that, and how it helps the state to not only to build their cybersecurity capacity, but also to identify the roles and responsibility for the various actors in the cybersecurity domain. So in some cases, like we saw it in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and also in the India and Pakistan, they are in the process of developing a cybersecurity policy. And in some cases, they are now in kind of further finalizing the cybersecurity strategy as well, which will guide for next 5 to 6 years their country's strategy. And we also hear the linkage between the national security policy and also the cybersecurity strategy. So those are the linkages that we also got to know. So for the past 2 days, we had a very good discussion on this issue. And as we have been saying, and I would like to say to a larger audience here, the aim is we will develop a publication, which Albrecht has briefly touched upon in the introductory section as well. So we'll publish this in a kind of thematic brief where we'll be incorporating all the feedbacks and the discussion that we have received for the past 3 days, and then we'll publish the thematic brief, which will be shared across the audience, but also across to the cybersecurity community. So with this, I would like to formally conclude, and I would like to thank our 4 main speakers who despite their busy schedule, took time to participate, not only today, but also throughout those 2 days. I really thank all of them, and I will be keep in touch with you while we are trying to finalize the publication, but also related to other administrative matters as well. So with this, I would like to formally close the webinar, and thank you for all the participants, and thank you the speakers once again. Thank you.
Would you write a photograph like last 2 days? If you like.
No, we can try. We can try.
You can try.
I support the proposal.
So we can take one picture. I mean, group pictures of Floris. If you have, yeah. So I request all of them to open the video. I mean, the camera, if that is possible. So I guess we go with that, Floris. Yeah.
Yes, I will. Okay, so then everyone smile, and I will take a picture in 3, 2, 1. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Rohit. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank
We'll
you.
keep in touch.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Manik. Bye. Bye, Roshan. Good to see you.
Bye. Thanks a lot for a lovely 2-day seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your cooperation.
You and all your team.
Thank
Floris
you. Thanks.
and everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank you very much. Thanks for attending, Roshan.